I don't think it's controversial to say that diet impacts our health and our life. Weird then how controversial it can be to say that diet impacts cancer. So, in this video, you will tackle just that. How does diet impact cancer? What is the mechanism behind that? How does what we eat actually impact our cancer outcome? And obviously, because otherwise it wouldn't be a Marchwood video, we will look into what we can do with that information. Because information without implementation is just useless. Now, my name is Merlin. I'm one of the co-founders of Marchwood, where we help cancer patients such as yourself, or perhaps someone you know, without living cancer. This video will only be a tiny piece of the mosaic method, which we developed to help our father outlive cancer when he first got diagnosed. The goal of the mosaic method is very, very simple. It is to simply decrease the cancer cell growth rate and increase the cancer cell death rate. It's very simple, but incredibly difficult to do. And that's why we have an entire mosaic method guide detailing everything that goes towards this in the description below. Also, nothing can be guaranteed. Obviously, cancer is extremely vicious, so we can give you some tools, but we cannot promise that they will work for everyone. Now, to understand how diet can impact cancer, we must first take a look here at a cancer tumor. Now, most cancer tumors, to some capacity, will consume glucose. They will ferment this glucose and make lactic acid from it. And this lactic acid, of course, will increase acidity of the tumor. That's in the name of lactic acid. Interestingly, this is where cancer cells are different from normal cells. Normal cells will just die if it becomes too acidic. Cancer cells will then start to actively excrete acid as an adaptation to the high acidity. But why is that bad? Well, this heightened acidity improves cancer progression. It improves metabolic flexibility of cancer, which allows cancer cells to utilize fuels other than glucose, which is precisely not what we want, because we want to be able to control or to impact cancer growth with metabolic interventions or dietary interventions. It also improves cancer immune evasion and cancer metastasis. So cancer metastasis is the process of cancer spreading throughout your body. I think it's quite logical then that we would want acidity to be gone. And consequently, because glucose consumption or glucose fermentation to lactic acid initiates this acidity in the first place, it's logical that we would want glucose to be gone just the same, so that we can inhibit these effects or perhaps even completely eliminate them. Now, how does that work? How does glucose fermentation work? What is required for glucose fermentation? What promotes glucose fermentation? And what are the effects of glucose fermentation? So firstly, of course, eating a lot of carbohydrates, which are necessarily broken down into simple sugars within our gut, does help with glucose fermentation because it spikes our blood sugar. So carbohydrate overfeeding improves glucose fermentation. Also, prolonged hypoxia improves glucose fermentation. Hypoxia is a tissue state where we have too little oxygen available. Now, glucose is the primary fermentable fuel in our body. So having a stage where a tissue state where you have too little oxygen will promote fermentation, because fermentation does not use oxygen. So prolonged hypoxia will promote glucose fermentation. Another thing that promotes glucose fermentation is mitochondrial damage, because mitochondria are the place where oxygen-dependent metabolism takes place. If they are damaged, we need to go to fermentation. We need to go into glucose fermentation to make up for the deficit in energy that the mitochondria usually produce, but now can't because they're damaged. And if we didn't produce this deficit with glucose fermentation, we would actually die. So it's quite good that the body does this, but it has some effects, especially for cancer. And glucose fermentation, the first thing it does is that it depletes glutathione, both by just direct depletion through creation of certain molecules that react with glutathione and deplete it, but also because it lowers the production of glutathione. And this lowered glutathione actually enables more mitochondrial damage to occur, because glutathione you can kind of imagine as a shield our cells use to protect themselves from damage, be it oxidative or glycative, so meaning oxygen dependent damage or sugar dependent damage. And glutathione protects our cells and thereby also our mitochondria from such damage. So having this depleted increases mitochondrial damage. You can see this is quite a vicious circle here, but it gets worse. So glucose fermentation, as we already know, increases acidity. And we have had some things detailed with what acidity does. One of the things that I didn't go into depth in, which is cancer progression, actually also has a subpart of that, which is the inhibition of cell suicide. That's one of the kind of inciting incidents in cancer progression, because if you inhibit cell suicide, your cancer cell just can grow and grow and grow without killing itself by being unwelcome by the body, let's say that. And glucose fermentation also directly inhibits cell suicide. But how does it do that, and how can we understand why that happens? Well, glucose fermentation produces a molecule called NADPH. Now, NADPH is a fancy word for a molecule. It's a shorthand. I don't want to go into what it is, but it has the capacity to reduce cytochrome C. Now, cytochrome C is also a fancy molecule, which is internal to the mitochondria. And cytochrome C can be used to initiate cell suicide. Now, reduced cytochrome C cannot do that. So reducing cytochrome C inhibits cell suicide quite directly. Now, increased acidity also directly inhibits immune function. I mentioned this with the acidity thing. And of course, one of the immune functions is to specifically tell cells that they are defective and to kill them. And this inhibition of the immune function actually inhibits cell suicide. And another thing the increased acidity does is that by various signaling pathways, it will increase the production of NADPH. Now, NADPH, again, as stated before, is a molecule that I don't want to get into too much depth into, but it reduces cytochrome C. And this, of course, again, inhibits cell suicide. So you can see this is quite the multi-causal way of inhibiting cell suicide. And of course, if we look back at our goal of decreasing cancer cell growth rate in cancer cells and increasing cancer cell death rates, we can see that having a glucose metabolism and thereby an inhibition of cell death actually hampers with this part of the equation. So it will actually decrease the cancer cell growth rate if we have a sugar metabolism or a carbohydrate dependent metabolism. Now, how does that look? If we take a cancer tumor here, of course, we have the glucose, which has the lactic acid, the acid accretion, acidification, the lowered cancer suicide. Now, if we get into a metabolic state through diet, for example, where we don't have a lot of glucose available, well, what happens? Well, we don't have lactic acid production anymore. And then we also don't have acidification. We don't have active acid secretion anymore. And thus, our cancer suicide rates will increase. So by removing glucose, or at least lowering the availability of glucose to our cancers, we can actually increase cancer cell suicide. But another thing happens, because as you've seen here, glucose was used to fuel these cancer cells. That also means that if there's less glucose, we can decrease cancer cell growth. And if we look back at our goal, we can see that we can decrease cancer cell growth rate and increase cancer cell death rate with a metabolic state known as ketosis. This metabolic state of ketosis is basically a state of high fat consumption, low carb consumption, or even full carb abstinence, and a balance of protein intake. Now, basically, you just stop eating carbs and you stop spiking your blood sugar, you thus need fat to make up for the energy you don't eat in carbs anymore, and thus you increase your fat consumption, and that puts you in ketosis, where your body is just using fat for energy. It's extremely healthy in many regards, but especially in with regard to cancer, where cancer cells will be fueled by glucose, which you get from carbs directly. If you eat carbs, they are digested in your gut into sugar and then taken up into your bloodstream directly, and thus fuel your cancer with the glucose from the carbs, or with the sugar from the carbs. Now, you can measure whether you have achieved glucose by measuring breath acetone or urinary ketones. Now, it doesn't really make a difference which one of these you measure. They track pretty well, they correlate pretty well, so it doesn't really matter. You just want to be in ketosis for effect against cancer. But what does that actually look like in day-to-day life? Now, I've prepared here a table of what I ate yesterday, or how my day of eating and drinking went yesterday, and what effects it had on my breath acetone. If you look at the time and food at the top, you have noon, evening, and then I have drinks and breath acetone. Time is a bit of a misnomer, but I think it gets the point across. And then on the right here, we have foods that I ate in the given time, or drinks that I drank at the given throughout the day, and then of course the breath acetone. Now, what you see here is that at noon I had 3 eggs, which already gives fat. I had 40 grams of ghee, 80 grams of butter, 3 centiliters of heavy cream, and 80 grams of beef salami, some salt and some spices. That was my basically my breakfast, but late breakfast, so at 12 o'clock. That's a lot of fat, right? Yes, and you need that much fat, because if you look at the evening, I had 550 grams of lean steak, approximately. I didn't weigh it, but that's from doing this a long time. I have quite a good feeling of how much meat I eat. And with that, I had 150 to 180 grams of butter. And I drank throughout the day 2 cappuccini, and quite a lot of water. Now, the interesting thing we see with breath acetone is that in the morning I had 12 ppm, which puts me in good ketosis. In the evening I had 34 ppm, which also puts me in good ketosis. And in the morning after I had 4 ppm, which might be worrisome might look worrisome, because that's quite a low state of ketosis, or a light state of ketosis. To me, it's not worrisome, because I've seen that my ketosis values dip in the morning, and they come up, after eating some food throughout the day, and especially in the evening, they're the highest. You can test this for yourself, how that works out. But even with that much fat, I was only at 34 ppm in the evening, meaning that I probably could have eaten less steak and more butter or more fat to get better or more thoroughly, more deeply into ketosis. And this just shows you how much fat you actually need to consume. Because remember, you basically need to exchange all the energy you usually get as carbs with energy in the form of fat. And that does look like 40 grams of ghee, 80 grams of butter, 3 centiliters of heavy cream, and then 180 grams of butter in the evening. It just looks like that. And I think even 180 grams of butter in the evening is quite low. Like, I should probably have eaten more fat that day. That's one of the lower days, just if you do the calculations and if you look at your basal metabolic rate and you want to have 70 to 90% of your energy as fat. So this is just an example for you to kind of have something to go off when trying to implement ketosis, and also getting past that point of eating too little fat, which is a mistake that even I, loving to eat fat, do. Obviously, also, this has just been a piece of the Mosaic method. And if you want to read about the entire Mosaic method in the form of the Mosaic method guide, where we detail everything that you can do against cancer and all the reasons behind them, the scientific research backing it, and what our experience has been with how to best implement it, then you can find the Mosaic Method guide below. And if you then also have problems with implementation or what have you not, you can book a call in the description below as well and get help from us directly. We've been doing this with Dad now for 3 years on and off. Because he's cancer free, we don't really do the Mosaic Method all year round. We do it for 42 days throughout the year, and we've done it with another client over the last 6 months as well. So we know how to help people, or we know what it takes to implement it. We know the difficulties with implementation, and we know what it takes to help people implement it just the same. So get the Mosaic Method guide down below. Talk to us if you want help with implementation. And of course, as always, I wish you good health and healing. I wish you a very prosperous and long life despite your cancer, or perhaps because of your cancer, because it is the inciting incident in you becoming perhaps more healthy. And you might look back on it and say, for all the shit it gave you, and sorry for the word, but for all the shit cancer gave you, that it was actually a positive development all in all. God works in mysterious ways. Peace to you and God bless you.